You have Twitter though, Martha. Oh. Where's that sound coming from? Nowhere. Okay, no, it's not. Maybe somebody's phone. I think we're good. We good to go? Okay, sweet. Oh yeah, no, there's feedback somewhere. It's over here, right? Ooh. What about now?
That sounds good.
Wait, did I? Test. I think we're good. Okay, welcome everybody to this lecture. It's been a long time coming for a lot of different reasons. I thought to do I was going to write about Kanye. I had like a piece on my Apple Notes for a long time. It kind of just like sat there. And then one day we were sitting here one day and we're like, you know, if you could do a lecture on anything for 1 hour, what would it be? And I was like, obviously Kanye West. Like it's a no-brainer. However, I will say I'm not a pro. A lot of you are Kanye fans, so that's okay. Welcome. And yeah, it was obvious. I'm not a pro. Some of you might be pros, and so I'm going to leave time at the end for you to kind of share any expertise or any little nuggets that I probably will miss or I might miss in my overview of Kanye. In terms of the setup, we'll do kind of like a brief introduction and kind of like my own thesis of how we're going to frame analyzing his work today, and then ultimately we'll go through all of his work chronologically. Then we'll finish off with actual discussion. I've like some discussion questions planned. I'd love to hear what you all think, and if I convince you one way or another in terms of the importance of his art. And with somebody, sorry. No, but I would like qualitative feedback. I'd like tell me afterwards, or like you know, write in the feedback form, or we can discuss it. Obviously, with somebody very controversial as Kanye, I need to like frame this with caveats because he's hurt a lot of people and he said a lot of outlandish things. And so I just want to like caveat, like throw as many as necessary to provide the necessary justification. So number one, of course, he's imperfect. He's a human like all of us. And as we're looking through his work today, we're going to try and understand him as a person rather than a political abstraction, which is difficult to do, but I think is important too. He's obviously provocative and impulsive. Sometimes those provocations, they actually lack logic and meaning, so we don't actually have to take them all so seriously. I obviously don't condone his anti-Semitic remarks in case that was not obvious or not obvious already. And then obviously in doing all of this, we can critically think about his ideas, separate the good ideas from the bad ones, just like we would with a great thinker or pretty much anybody. We don't have to totally. And so my main idea is I think that Kanye's art and life are hyperbolic expressions of the human experience. And what better than to take a picture of him from the Yeezus tour, where he was fully masked and performed most of the concert tour with a mask on. Kanye, and with that, with hyperbolic things and people, we see that they usually occur in extremes. We have like a normal human experience and normal emotions, and then we have extremes, and that's where Kanye creates his best stuff. He's rarely in the middle. He's one side or the other. And so we see that a lot of his great art. You'll notice Vultures is not here because I don't know, but they exist in history. And with there's many contradictions and dualities. We get opposites, and we have these opposite ideas that are kind of juxtaposed beside each other, and they make for really kind of beautiful, or they make us understand it in a different way. We see ego versus humility. That was perhaps most obvious. We see control and chaos, light and darkness, even artistry versus commerce, which is an interesting one. We see more when he goes into kind of his fashion ventures. Truth versus perception, strength and vulnerability, faith and sin. But perhaps most interestingly is good versus evil. And in good versus evil, I think it's notable to bring up this really powerful quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote the Gulag Archipelago. Has anybody heard of this? So it's kind of like a fictional recount of what happened in the in the gulags back in the 50s. Ben, I'm looking to you to confirm. Okay, thank you. And so this line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart and through all human hearts. This line shifts. Inside of us, it oscillates with the years, and even within our hearts overwhelmed by evil, one small head of good in understanding complex people, and keep this in mind because it's a movable thing, and we don't need to paint somebody with the same brush. We can recognize their capacity for both. Kanye, the name, is really interesting. Does anybody know what Kanye means? Any guesses? Yeah.
I think I know. Is it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So in Swahili, it means only one, or depending on the interpretation, always means to shine. Super interesting that Donda, she's of course an English professor, that she chose that name, Donda, and her husband at the time, of course. But then later in his life, he actually changes his name to Ye. Super fascinating change for a large number of reasons. But we see the significance of this, I think, is that in the Bible, it's actually one of the most common words when it refers to the plural version of you, um, or you as a group. And so, even in his own understanding of himself and the way that he's presenting the world, he's still oscillating between this like individual versus group, or feeling like he's representing uh, people, and the art that he's producing is ultimately expressing the people. It's super interesting. So Kanye Omari West was born June 8th, 1977 in Atlanta, Georgia, to Ray and Donda. Ray himself was a photojournalist, so super interesting, kind of interpretive type role. He was also a Black Panther in the kind of like civil rights movement. And then his mother, Donda, she is was an English professor at a variety of universities, and then most notably the head of the English department at Chicago State University. And she would also participate in a lot of sit-ins around civil rights. So this is interesting because these are his parents, and we'll see throughout his work that his strong sense for justice, or eye for justice, is really important. And of course, this is from one of his album covers. We don't know for sure; it's never been explicit, but we can only assume that that's Baby Kanye. Yeah. Didn't mean for that to be funny, but. Another interesting piece is he actually spent a year of his young life in China. When he was 10 years old, Donda took a cultural exchange over at Nanjing University, and he spent a full year there. I just think that it's It's random and it's interesting. And there's some obviously really great pictures that we could see from that time period. Um, and it also reminds me of a random little tidbit. I myself lived in China. When I was there, I would always go to like these KTV bars, and there's when I would go and look up the uh, Kanye songs, there'd only be one song on the list, which was weird. And I'd be like, why are none of Kanye's songs kind of like in the catalog, like over here in China? Does anybody want to guess what song it was?
What year was it?
I was there. Okay, good question. I was there from 2015 to 2017. And when I would even, sorry? No. So, and I would even ask like locals, like, do you know Kanye West? And they're like, no, not really. But like, we do know this song, which I thought this is like fascinating. Yeah. No.
Oh.
Okay. It's Love Lockdown.
Whoa.
Right? Like that would not even be on like the top 20 if you think here, but over there that was like very popularized and probably played widely. In terms of his upbringing, he obviously Donda was like a huge supporter for everything that he did and really encouraged him in many different ways. He went to a school called Polaris School for Individual Education. I was trying to dig a little bit more about what that meant. It was kind of an alternative school. It wasn't a normal public school, although it was within a public school district. And it sounds like they really prioritize individual interests and creativity. And so he, from a very young age, was encouraged in multiple areas of his life to pursue some of those deeper interests. He, at 13, wrote his first rap song called Green Eggs and Ham. Again, I couldn't find a version of this, but he convinced Donda to actually go to a recording studio and get it recorded. So he was successful in that. And yeah.
For the people that just came in, there's some more seat on this side if you want to go by.
You can come through here.
I see that you're recording, just so you know, we are live streaming this, so it will be. You don't need to like record the whole thing yourself if that's what you want. But if you're just taking clips for yourself, that's fine.
I just want to say the quality is so good.
Of the live stream.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you. I'm paying a lot of money.
Hello to everyone on the live stream. Maybe Kanye's listening. I'm not sure. Education was really important to him at a young age, and eventually he goes on to study fine arts at Chicago State University. That's the same school that Donda works at. And then he eventually drops out. This is really important for a few different reasons, because it was obviously a big tension at some point between he and his mom. Ultimately, he supported her. And then during this time, he's starting to create early beats and kind of like making his name known around the Chicago area. So with those early producing years, he produced Jermaine Dupri's album. That was the first one in like full length. And then he became known for the style called chipmunk soul, which is basically taking old soul pieces and then speeding them up or increasing the pitch, and then using those or looping those onto rap songs. So he also used looping, where he would just like take that one excerpt and actually play it in the background for the entire song, forming as the base of the song, or also phrase sampling, which is taking like the pieces of the song that kind of pull at your heartstrings and maybe could be played as part of a hook and that sort of thing. He starts to gain popularity at Rockefeller Records, and he is kind of recruited to help produce The Blueprint, the first version of it in 2001. So a few of the key songs on that album he's responsible for producing. So Izzo, Heart of the City, and Never Change, and then Get by Talib Kweli, which was also a hit, but kind of like a random one. I didn't realize that he actually produced that. And then he produced Bonnie and Clyde, which is the first Jay and Beyonce collaboration. As all of this is happening, he's clearly successful. He's clearly showing, he's proving himself, but he's ultimately denied credibility as a rapper. He wants to go into rapping, but he's feel like he's being pigeonholed, and he's thinking about ways to break out from that. ultimately, he didn't come from the streets. He came from a middle-class background, and that was not good enough to produce your own rap album at the time. Most of, gangster rap was the main successful style at the time. So here's an example of that kind of like early sampling that he's doing. See if you can guess the song. This one might be obvious, but we'll see. Oh no. I think it's obvious. I think it brings it. Great song. And then, so he's on the come up. He's, getting his name known. He's now responsible for Jay-Z's hit album. Jay-Z's not small at the time, by the way. Like, he's already produced like multiple great albums, so he's definitely on the map. And then October 23rd comes around, 2 weeks after he actually signed a contract, not a full album, but like a contract with Rockefeller. He gets in a tragic car accident. So his jaw is shattered in 3 places, and it needs to be wired shut. This is hugely destructive to what he envisions his career trajectory to be. It actually happens on the way home from a late night recording session. And then he's brought to the hospital, the same hospital that Biggie Smalls actually passed away in. And so he's in the hospital. He's like thinking through all these things. He's wondering what his appearance is going to look like. He's wondering about his career, all of these things. So what does Kanye do next? What does Kanye do next? Does he lay low and delay, his career? Does he turn to substance to cope? Does he wallow in self-pity? Or does he create? So this is when he produces Through the Wire. 2 weeks after the accident, he records it. So he's thinking about this the whole time. Apparently, he started rapping 3 days after the accident, and he samples Chaka Khan's Through the Fire. Funny little story about that. She actually rejected him. She rejected him when he asked to use a piece of her song, and she showed it to her son, and her son was like, "No, mom, like do it." Like, let him do it, let him do it. And that's how it got accepted. So obviously he's using her play on love in that song, and kind of like changing it up to describe his love for his career on that song, which is really interesting. So instead of Through the Fire, it's actually Through the Wire. He's on this pursuit. This is hugely popular, goes platinum in the US, wins a Grammy for Best Rap Solo. And then this is actually what convinced Rockefeller Records to actually let him do his own rap album. And then even after all of this, he's in some ways really thankful for this really horrible event that has happened to him. And that leads him to actually produce The College Dropout. So he gets the rap album, he produces it largely by himself. I think what's interesting about this is that he is new on the scene. He is a backpack wearing kid. He's not really from the streets. He's starting to gain credibility, starting to establish credibility. But instead of playing it safe, and instead of creating just like a random thing that fits with the times, he creates something. He actually introduces himself as a way of rejecting certain social norms. So he's introducing himself as a dropout of the education system. And there's a lot of themes of ambition versus doubt. We see materialism and spirituality, ego and vulnerability. And then it actually goes on to win best rap album. So huge moment here. And as he is thematically kind of putting this all together and kind of introducing himself to the world with his lyrics, he actually goes out on a limb and says, right now, if you're a hip hop artist, you can only get played on the radio if you rap about guns, sex, lies, and videotapes. But if you talk about God or religion, then you actually your record won't get played. And so he actually says on Jesus Walks, if this takes away from how much I'm going to get played on the radio, then maybe it will, take away from how much money I make, but maybe it'll actually help me on Judgment Day. Ultimately, if I'm, being judged by God, maybe this is actually the right choice. And it'll bring about that kind of like heavenly day that he dreams about one day. And he kind of loops it back into that heaven would be everybody in the club screaming his songs. So just like a really interesting double line, and he introduces himself in such a powerful way in that first album. And so goes right into Late Registration. He does not chill. He goes right into the second one. He now starts planning the second of the 4 education-themed albums. He's moving on from chipmunk samples because he feels like that's kind of getting old and it's outdone already in his mind. So he starts to bring in more orchestral sounds, more strings, bell piano, harpsichord, if that's how you pronounce it. Harpsichord, thank you. I knew you would know. I might come back to you now. He overspent on this. He went into debt. I believe it was $2 million. He went, I think, $600,000 in debt on creating this album. So again, no chill. He's like really going for it. And he introduces a bunch of interesting critiques around institutional racism, higher ed, the diamond industry, which we'll see later on. And he has these like frat skits that are hilarious. If you go back and listen to them, it's called the frat called Broke Fi Broke, which is it's just hilarious to go back and listen to. That one also wins best rap album. So 2 in a row, really great. And this is continuing the theme of him dropping out of school and kind of going against the grain. So this is included on this album is Hey Mama, which it sounds like he had been writing and thinking about for a long time. And then he finally includes it on this album. And this is a really cute video of him singing it to her in the kitchen. He also plays this on Oprah, which is, if you go back and watch it, it's very, very cute. Because, I'll just say that. Okay, so he has two Grammy award-winning success albums. What does Kanye do next? Bask in the glory, go on a media tour, buy a nice house and chill, or create? Any guesses? That's right. So then he goes right back in to start producing Graduation. And it's not the same as the past 2 albums. He starts evolving again towards anthems, more layered synthesizers, more electronic. He's taking sampling now beyond just soul. So if you remember Daft Punk, for example, so Daft Punk is on Stronger. That's like one of the most iconic versions of that, I guess. He had been on tour with U2, and he was really inspired by the way that U2 connected with their audience and were able to create these great anthems and other rock bands as well. So he started to develop more theme songs that were less complicated, a little bit more introspective, but some songs that people could easily sing along with. No more skits. He removes the whole skits idea. It's pretty much all hits. If you go back and listen to Graduation, who is telling me this is their favorite? Whose favorite is Graduation? Put up your hand.
Somebody did yesterday.
Okay. Yeah. Anyways. Oh, it was Hamayel. So yeah, this one was obviously pivotal for a few different reasons. Another interesting part is this was dropped on the same day as 50 Cent's Curtis album, which both were really hyped up, but ultimately they were both successes. Graduation more than expected. And so this kind of marks an end to the gangster rap era a little bit, because it shows that someone like Kanye, who is not from the streets, can still gain credibility in this genre, and kind of balance it out a little bit. And then just as, again, he comes off of this third great album, Donda passes away. So his mother passes away on November 20th, 2007. And it was from a complication with reconstructive or like plastic surgery. So it's a really, really dark time for him. She passed away at home, actually, just the day after the surgery, so super sudden. And then he also, around the same time, splits with his fiance, Alexis Pfeiffer. So he has this really dark time. And this one's, you could imagine, what does he do next? Fight the medical system, turn to substance abuse to cope, go therapy and lay low, or create, you know. So he goes into the studio and he starts 808s and Heartbreaks, and Heartbreak rather. And so this one is perhaps the biggest departure so far from rap. So it's a blended album. It's a lot more introspective, the really deep themes of loss and loneliness. He incorporates auto-tune as like an interesting way to convey emotion. When people kind of told him, like, why are you doing this auto-tune thing? And he's like, no, like, I just really like the sound of it. Like he was super excited about it. And most of the vocals on the album actually are in auto-tune. He uses the 808 drum machine, which is kind of used throughout the album. It's also released in 2008, so he's like playing on a few different themes there. And this is the birth of emo rap as a category. So this almost makes it okay to be both emotional and also have bravado. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by the feedback. And this kind of paves the way for Kid Cudi, Drake, and some of the other ones that come on later on. If you go back, if this album was not as successful, would we even be ready for Drake? I don't know, not sure. And then this album's super heartbreaking and ends with a live version of Pinocchio Story, where he's playing it live in Singapore. He wasn't going to include it on the album, but Beyonce encouraged him to include it. And it's kind of him asking to be treated like a real boy. It's really sad. He actually starts crying on stage. And I have some lyrics there on the right-hand side that you could see, where he's kind of complaining a little bit about this like a super isolating lifestyle that he has, being famous and being a celebrity. And there's nothing that he could do to actually change the loss and the sadness that he is sitting in. And then famously, the Taylor Swift incident comes by. I think everybody knows what happens, but he storms on stage after the VMA Best Video Award that Taylor won. And he goes and he grabs the mic, and maybe he's a little bit drunk, and he says, you know, Beyonce had the best video of all time. And everybody, of course, hated this. This is like, he's such an asshole move. But this was another dark moment where everybody was turned against him. He actually appeared on Jay Leno that evening, and there was. So that was the night of, which is super wild. So obviously, whoops. What do you think he does next? Does he accept cancellation? He does post an apology. I will say he does post an apology to Taylor Swift the next day on Twitter, early Twitter, that is. What do we think he does? We already know. He goes on to create one of the best albums of all time. He first starts with a self-exile to Hawaii. He was supposed to go on tour with Gaga, but that got canceled and kind of like ripped underneath him after all of this. Like, everybody hates him after this. Even Obama calls him a jackass. Like, Obama's like peak at this time too. So he's really going into a dark place. He self-exiles. He takes a short break, and then he goes back to the studio. And it's, again, no chill with back to the studio. He actually blocks out 3 different studios in the same general studio for 24 hours a day. And he just goes on nonstop. When he gets tired or he hits a mental block in one room, he'll just move to the second room and keep going. He returns to maximalism, as we call it. He spent $3 million on this album. It's actually one of the most expensive albums in history. And a lot of themes: fame, excess, hedonism, heartbreak, escapism, obviously, and self-doubt. He actually flies out a bunch of stars and producers to help on this, most notably Kid Cudi, of course, Elton John, Rihanna, Rick Ross, Pusha T, Mia Mos Def. I always forget how to pronounce that one. Mos Def. Thank you. And huge success. He reasserts dominance on the scene, and this is critically acclaimed as one of his best works for many different reasons. Put up your hand if this is like your favorite Kanye album. Okay, more. Okay, somebody likes Jesus is King out here. I want to kind of just deconstruct one of the songs on this album, Power, of course. I think this one is like the richest in terms of trying to understand what this album is about. It's super complex. It's the struggle of internal power and external power. It kicks off strong, but then contrasts with really depressive notes. He's kind of going from high highs to low lows, as we were talking about before. And he's embracing his role as a villain in the same breath that he's comparing himself to Jesus on the cross. So these are very extremes that he's now relating himself to. There are some really chilling lines on this that if you were just listening to this, like, you know, at the club and not really like listening to the lyrics, you might actually not realize it. But he says, I got the power to make your life so exciting. But the way that he pronounces it sounds like suicide. So kind of evoking these opposites. We see there's like a hook at the, or sorry, an outro that's like, you know, talking about directly like suicide. And then he finally, at the end of the song, kind of removes the third wall and asks the audience, you know, do you have the power to let power go? So it's a very intentional move that he's doing here to relate to his audience, but also compare the struggles that he's facing. And then the music video for this is very rich with symbolism. We see he's wearing the Eye of Horus chain around his neck, which maybe like represents the fact that he really values knowledge and truth and the pursuit of that. But then there's a sword, the sword of Damocles is like hovering over his head. You can't really see it, but it's there. And then in the background, you hear this like 21st century schizoid man. So really opposites, but also a great song. And if you didn't look into the lyrics, you probably just love it. And I think that's one of the most powerful pieces about his work. There's a bigger version of this. It's kind of like a moving portrait. The whole video is kind of like this moving portrait. And then from that, he goes on to do Watch the Throne. So this first started because he collaborated with Jay-Z on a Power remix. And then the next day he tweeted, like, we're going to have another album. Or I'm going to do another album, but it's going to be with Jay-Z this time. He wasn't obsessed with the idea of collaborations prior to this, but then when it came to Jay-Z, it's like, oh, like, it's obvious. Like, there's some people you just have to do collaborations with in terms of whole albums. It's very lavish. It is a mix of hip hop, soul, and electronic. In terms of themes, it's celebrating Black excellence while also critiquing systemic oppression. Wealth, power, race, and legacy, all important themes that we see even more come out here. And it ends up being a landmark collaboration in hip hop, as obvious. And then Otis won Best Rap Song. This one didn't win any Grammys for the full album, but for individual songs it did. Here's another example of his sample. See if you can guess it. So that one, that actually kicks off the album. So that was a very interesting intro. And then soon after that, I guess there's about a year and a half break, and he goes to Yeezus. So I think that in my own perspective of all of Kanye's art, I think this one is actually like the middle point, where it kind of peaks, and then we start to see a little bit more disjointed and or bizarre sound, up for debate and interpretation, of course, which we'll get to. But this comes after he starts getting into the fashion industry, and he's met with a lot of barriers, and he wants to create his own thing in his own style, but turns out designers don't respect that, or they don't want him to just come in and do whatever he wants. And he's specifically, what's interesting about this is he's on one of the most iconic runs of all time, right? He just did again, album after album. Everybody's expecting another great album. And instead of sticking to the trend of what he's used to, he goes and creates something super out there, completely different in style in all ways. Two of the first songs that he actually wrote, I Am a God and Black Skinhead, were both made when he was told that he can't go to all of the fashion shows. He can only go to the one that he's talking to. So it was Saint Laurent at the time. The executives were saying, you can only go to this one show. You can't just go and be at all of these things. That's just not allowed. And he's so frustrated that he goes on and he writes those two songs. And when he talked about the full album, he said, this is actually what frustration sounds like. He's very frustrated in this time. So it's very industrial, raw, minimalist beats. It's obviously very controversial. There's a lot of, this is when he starts talking about the slavery idea and, slavery is a choice kind of thing, which we could see in different contexts later on. And this is the time also that he goes on to BBC Radio 1. He does an interview with Zane Lowe, and it's about an hour video, and it's full of very intense sound bites. There's probably 10 sound bites that you probably know in your head from watching, and it's interesting because this happens at the same time that he's realizing his influence on social media. The algorithms the feeds are starting to be invented on these social media. This is 2013. And he's starting to realize that sound bites actually go a really long way. And he's leaning into that as a way to get more attention, get more eyes on him, and get people to pay attention more. This interview's really interesting in a variety of different ways. The most interesting one to me, I think, is that he feels like it's his responsibility to speak for other people. He says, he's looking around these rooms and seeing that he doesn't see anybody that looks like him. And if they are, they're really quiet. So he's kind of doing the opposite. He's being so loud about everything, some things that are, maybe not necessary. And so we'll just watch a clip of this.
So I understand we want to make it about music, but I wanted to take this.
I will also say, throughout this whole interview, poor Zane Lowe is trying to bring it back to music, and this guy is not wanting to talk about music. He's just going to societal critiques, and so it's super interesting from an interviewer's perspective.
Say, we got this new thing called classism. It's racism's cousin. This is what we do to hold people back. This is what we do. And we got this other thing that's also been working for a long time, and you don't have to be racist anymore. It's called self-hate. It works on itself. It's like real estate of racism. Where just like that, when someone comes up and says something like, I am a God, everybody says, who does he think he is? I just told you who I thought he is. I just told you. That's who I think I am. Would it have been better if I had a song that said, I am a nigga? Or if I had a song that said, I'm a gangster? Or if I had a song that said, I'm a pimp? All those colors and patinas fit better on a person like me, right? But to say you are a God, especially when you got shipped over to the country that you're in and your last.
So as we see with these sound bites, I think we could still follow the logic at this point, and we could see how he's getting there, and he's being really experimental with the way that he's describing and communicating it. And it's hugely successful. I mean, like still these clips are viral like on all the platforms. So he's successful in that way. He's experimenting. I think it's intriguing him in an interesting, in a unique way. This is when he starts to get into fashion, as I mentioned before. So he launches Yeezy. It's full of futuristic aesthetics, neutral tones. He's creating the partnerships at this time. So I know it says here that they fall out, but he's creating them at this time. And ultimately, he redefines sneaker culture. Back in 2013, when he first started this, in probably 14, 15, 16, Yeezys were known as this like out there thing. However, within probably 5 years, it became just like all sneakers look like that, just a little bit dialed back. This is huge because he now goes into this new domain, puts this new artistic model out there, and it becomes standard. This is when he gets also married to Kim Kardashian. So in some ways, you could say he strapped himself to a rocket ship in terms of getting more attention. Obviously, it's his dream girl, but at the same time, it influences him in a lot of different ways. So it brings new depth to his music. It's introspective. He focuses on family, marriage, and parenting, which is an obvious departure from some of the other themes. Although they're still present, they're still kind of juxtaposed. And some say he kind of marries fame thematically here, because he now he's not just by himself. Now he's attached to this super influential family that literally has a reality TV show. And that's when he starts to create the life of Pablo. So this is when he starts to reconnect with his gospel influences, spirituality, fame, intention. Here we see that he constantly updates the life of Pablo even after the release. So he's a perfectionist, but he's doing it a little bit after. We see a little bit more of his impulsivity come out. And then we also see, that on the album cover of this one, if we go back one, we see the juxtaposition of these two opposite themes. We see family, and then we see new family, and then we also see like girls. So he has this tension between the things that he values, or perhaps the temptations that he's experiencing as a celebrity in his life. And then we also see on the cover these words, "which one," which point to the fact that there's different types of Pablos that he's identifying with here. Does anybody want to guess the different Pablos? I already gave one away, but who are the different Pablos that he might be thinking about?
Escobar.
Pablo Escobar, yes. Picasso? I'll be so impressed if somebody gets the last one. Close, but no. Close. Yes. So there's 3 different Pauls that he's referencing and comparing himself to here. The first one is Pablo Picasso, of course, the archetype of the artist, right? The most obvious version, but also not without his struggles either. Pablo Escobar was the criminal, but also indulging in excess and all of that. And he clearly is relating to that at this point. And then the last one is Pablo, which is actually Saint Paul, or you might, the last song on the album is actually called Saint Pablo. He's interesting because he's actually the spiritual leader of the church. He's one of Jesus's disciples. He starts as a Jew. He actually prosecutes Jesus, but then eventually has this vision of Jesus and then changes his mind. And he goes on to actually be one of Jesus's first kind of spreaders of his word kind of thing. And you could see that Kanye sees himself in that role too, as someone whose role is to spread the awareness of Jesus or spirituality more generally. And then, so he's really leaning into the religious piece at this point. We're seeing more obvious mental health challenges come out here. He gets a place in Wyoming. He starts making a bunch of music during those Wyoming sessions. He goes on TMZ. He obviously says that point of slavery is a choice. That's a soundbite with more depth to it, of course, that maybe was not brought in context. I think in hindsight, if we were to look at it, I think what he was saying is like the mental slavery, or there's even a song called New Slaves where he's comparing it to different ways that all of us are slaves in our own lives, in terms of the mental rigid chains that we wear kind of thing. He goes on TMZ, he says that, and then he rewrites the album completely before or right after that TMZ experience. So super interesting there, almost like a brand new direction. And Melody actually reminded me of this, is that when he joked that this was going to be an album cover, this conversation of a screenshot that he has. It says, if you can't see, this is my album cover. This is the plastic surgeon, Jan Adams, the person who's performed my mother's final surgery. Do you have any ideas for titles? Any title ideas? And then he says, I want to forgive and stop hating. And the person replies, love everyone. And so he actually joked that that album was going to be called Love Everyone. And this would be the picture. And so he's leading into this like super radical acceptance of everyone. Yeah. And then he ends up producing Yay. I think this is around the same time that he actually changes his name. It comes out with an album cover called I Hate Being Bipolar. It's awesome. And there's obviously a very heavy mental health focus, a lot more talk about suicide again. And surprisingly, although it's a really short album, it does decently well among critics. They still rate it pretty well. Anybody here have that as their top album? Oh, okay. Second top. Okay. Nice. And this is when he also is really leaning into Twitter. This is the era that we remember of him saying everything from serious to silly things. Like, you know, once again, I'm being attacked for presenting new ideas. But then my favorite one is, I hate when I wake up on a flight and I realize I wake up with a water bottle next to me, like, oh, great. Now I got to be responsible for this water bottle. Or this one here, it's looking at, he's just like playing around with all the emojis, like specifically, when is this emoji appropriate? And it's just like a dress, like a traditional dress. And of course, I no longer have a manager. I can't be managed. So this is now Kids See Ghosts era with Kid Cudi. He had worked with Kid Cudi like plenty of times before, and then he eventually decided to do an album with him. He's had rocky, like it's kind of been high and low with Kid Cudi over the years, probably for a variety of different reasons, but it ends up being a very experimental album, very psychedelic. When I first listened to this, I thought it was crazy, actually. I was like, this is like, I'm never going to like this, but it actually grew on me. Is this anybody's favorite? Okay, I respect you, Daniel. So yeah, also a lot of religious themes in that one. And then we go full gospel album. Faith, redemption, and devotion are huge pieces. He starts the Sunday service choir. He's really thinking of himself as a spiritual leader. He wants to create like a new version of church, pretty much. If you've ever watched the YouTube sessions, these ones, they're super fun to listen to and watch and figure out what's going on here. It's divisive for a lot of obvious reasons, but ultimately it's pretty successful. It wins the Grammy for Best Contemporary Christian Album. I don't know what the competition's like in that category, but there's also a video that a film that he put out in theaters around this time, around this one. That was kind of like a visual experience of the actual album itself. And then that brings us to Donda and Donda 2. So originally, Donda, the album cover was this one up at the top, but then he decided to go on with a black square, which is super interesting, obviously, for a variety of reasons. The album cover still to this day, on Spotify at least, is just a black square. It's a tribute to Donda. It actually opens with her final heartbeats on the song Donda. So it's actually like the ECG or whatever you want to call it of the final like speed up and slow down of her hearts right before her heart right before she dies. It's super dark to listen to, of course. And this one has record-breaking streams. This one surprised me, actually. There's probably a lot of other reasons going on here, pandemic-related stuff. But but it's super long as well. I even have created my own version of this called Donda Distilled, because there's just a lot that I don't like on this album, but there is a lot of great stuff there too. I'm curious for other people's opinions on that later. He wins the Grammy for Jail and for Hurricane, so individual songs. Even in this more increasingly controversial time, he is still winning those Grammys and somewhat able to convince people. Donda 2, I'll be honest, I never actually listened to it. It was released exclusively on the STEM player, which was an experimental kind of product and speaker. Did anybody happen to have an experience with that? Yeah?
From the STEM player, so you just play it in his car.
What was that experience like?
It was weird.
Fair enough. It also feels like it was maybe unfinished. There were aspects of it that seems like maybe it was pushed to production. And if I remember correctly, he changed this up quite a few times as well. And then we get to finally Vultures 1 and 2. I don't have much to say around these two, just because, especially the second one, because I can't say that I've done a proper analysis of it. But this one is controversial again, and this is post a lot of the anti-Semitic remarks actually as well. And so he's being critiqued in the media. It's presented alongside the fact that he has bipolar disorder, which you might not see for other artists, but specifically around this one now, it's kind of added. There's a label attached to it, and he also notably includes his daughter on one of the songs. That is an interesting choice as well. And so with all of this, that was a long run through all of his music history. I want to kind of finish up or wrap it all up together with this question of why he has decided to be so controversial in recent years, particularly around racism. What is that? Is that just a response? This is an open question. I have some ideas which I'll share, but I'd love to hear everybody else's as well. Is it just a response to declining mental health, maybe aspects that were already there? Is it that he has become addicted or too comfortable with provoking people and getting a rise and getting the sound bites, and he knows exactly what to say to get people to pay attention? Is it simply that? Does it lack actual meaning still? Or is it a somewhat not sophisticated defense mechanism, but is it a faulty mental shortcut that he's actually going to as a way of explaining his chaotic and frustrating experience as a celebrity working with the media, but also facing and putting himself up against society? It seems classic in-group, out-group thinking, where he's almost scapegoating particularly one race, and he's almost like blaming all of the problems on that one race, particularly Jewish people, as he has said. Is he using that as a way to incorrectly cope with his own individual struggle in a way that lacks logic? Or is it also just a response to deep resentment when your ego and your creativity are threatened? As we saw back on My Dark Twisted Fantasy, the thing that he matters most in his life, aside from family, of course, is his creativity. And he feels like anything that threatens that, he gets super defensive around. And so is this specifically around the record label stuff, is he seeing that as people getting in his way from actually being and letting his creativity out, which he values most high? These are just questions that I have. And then I also can't help but wonder about why he is doing this at this point in his life, when he's shown that he has healthy ways of coping in so many ways. He can put all of that frustration into creating the best art. But then he also is clearly faulting, and he's going back to these like defense mechanisms that we all revert back to in really stressful situations, unless we're pros, of course, which I don't think anybody is. But specifically around scapegoating or displacement or blaming other people that are not actually related, or coming up with more complicated understandings of a particular issue. So these are just questions that I have. Yeah. And so with that, key takeaways before we turn it into a full-on discussion. I think that Kanye's life is both inspiring, but also a cautionary tale for all of us. It brings the question, do these aspects of his behavior in recent years make his work more or less important? In a way, we saw him always talking about these themes in his earlier work, specifically around racism. Does that make it more important? Or does it kind of like diminish it in some way? I think a takeaway is that the internal war is lifelong, specifically with that song Power. Humans are really complex and we all deal with a variety of these issues on varying scales. Don't be afraid of the dark. He's gone through so many different points, which we saw, which are really tragic scenarios, but only in those really dark moments did he actually find the thing that is most valuable to him, which ultimately is his creativity and is that light. And also amidst the desert, create. And lastly, of course, know your own capacity for good and evil and choose wisely. That's what I could take away from it. And so with that, I'd like to say thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you to everyone who's been on the other side of that, for not just on the lead up to this lecture, of course, but over the years, I feel like I've always been a really passionate Kanye fan and trying to make sense of it and explain it to other people. Not everybody wants to listen, and that's okay. In terms of who to credit, this, of course, Wikipedia, ChatGPT, and Rap Genius, but most importantly, this, has anybody listened to this series on Spotify? This is like probably one of the best pieces of media that I've ever listened to. And I listen to a lot of podcasts. This is so well done. It's a podcast series where he goes song by song analysis of some of Kanye's greatest albums and other hip hop albums. It's a guy named Cole Kushner. And he started by doing My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, where he'll do a full episode of breaking down the layers of the actual music, but also the lyrics, but also Kanye as a person and all of the things surrounding it, and tells really beautiful stories. He also did Yeezus, and I think just those two. Am I wrong? Anybody? Yeah, I think he just did those two, but they're very, very well done. So I highly recommend those. And then lastly, I want to turn it now into a discussion. If you have questions for me specifically, sure, but I think that's less interesting than your hot takes or your caveats that you would like to add to this, or any potential responses to these questions that I thought of. Can we separate the art from the artist? To what extent should we acknowledge our own capacity for evil? Should we just like ignore it and not think about it? Or should we actually like spend time considering it? Who are your Pablos? Who are the people that you consider to be your aspects of your identity that maybe encapsulate part of it, or that you strive to or feel pulled to act like for a variety of reasons? What are your favorite lyric songs or albums? Which moments took the longest to grow on you? Did his recent behavior make his art more or less important? And how would you handle Kanye's life differently? What would you differently at different stages of his journey to kind of keep some of those more chaotic pieces under wrap? I'll pause there, but if anybody wants to jump in, you can. Yeah.
Thank you. That was awesome. I was really looking forward to this, and you exceeded all my expectations. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
When you talked about his transition and how he transitioned hip hop away from gangster to a more soulful vibe, more backbeat, it made me think about my own favorite album, and it ended up being 808s. But what was interesting about 808s was at the time that it came out, my initial perspective was a negative one. I found myself jumping into the criticizing him for using auto-tune and kind of like the industry pushback against him. But it was only after a friend of mine kind of criticized me for following the herd and just told me to listen to it, did I really understand that tension? Because I had come up on Wu-Tang, I had come up on all that, and it was less so a conscious transition and more so me making excuses for trying to get behind this new sound and this new artist. And
Interesting.
so I really appreciate you speaking to that, because I wouldn't have had that memory otherwise.
Yeah. I never thought of it that way either until somebody told me, like, yeah, like Drake wouldn't have been Drake. The world wouldn't have been ready for Drake until that came out. Sir, yeah, please.
Talk about Drake, I'm forgetting about Joe Budden.
Mm.
Yeah, so Joe Budden, I feel like he was the blueprint for like emo rap and like emotional rap, but he was still within that gangster rap realm, right? I think that it would have been a different landscape, right, without 808s, but I feel like Joe Budden did kind of lay down a bit of the acceptance of like emotion within gangster rap within
Prior
that way.
to 808s.
Prior to 808s.
Are there particular albums or songs that you think about?
Not pumped up.
My comment is going to be something totally different and more relating to the first question that you have up on the screen. Can we separate the art from the artist? I think when I think of that question, Kanye is like the artist that you think of who you debate this question about. Can you separate the art from the artist? And I think what he does really well is, as you mentioned, like how provocative he is and like just how he talks, what he says, how he makes music. And I think that is a part of his art. He's artistic about how he provokes people. And that TMZ interview that you mentioned, there's a clip of that interview where he goes into the TMZ offices and he just like raids it and talks about slavery and says, we're all slaves and like, to our mind, and we could do this and we could do that. And there's a TMZ correspondent that fights back like on the spot. And he says, well, you can say this because you are a celebrity and you get to sit on your throne and you get to make these comments and you get to reap the results of being provocative, right? You get attention, you get streams, you get money. But the rest of us that are on the ground have to deal with the consequences of you making these statements. So I don't think you can separate the art from the artist. The art itself has very real world implications to the rest of the people that are kind of like the cohort that art applies to. So it's practically impossible because the artist itself is the art. So I've thought about that first question a lot. I've debated that first question a lot with a lot of people, especially being a big Kanye fan and the comments that he makes. So it's impossible to separate Kanye from the stuff that he makes because that's who he is. I don't know if anybody else
Thank you.
wants to. I don't know if anybody else.
Anybody else want to add to that or respond to any of the other questions?
I also have another comment. One
Keep
more
going.
comment.
You got the
Yeah,
mic.
I already have the mic. One point, because I also really big fan of Kanye and his intersection with fashion, obviously.
With fashion.
With fashion, yeah. Kanye, I think, started. I mean, he's always been into fashion, right? Like he's been a leader in terms of pushing the envelope for what people wear, how people wear them. The double polo during the late registration era, the backpack. He actually ventured into. I'm sure people know, but if people don't know, he ventured into fashion way earlier with a self-made brand called Pastel with Don C. I think Virgil was a part of it before Virgil started Off-White and Pyrex. Ben Baller, the jewelry guy, they started Pastel together, or they were part of a cohort that started Pastel, and he made a whole bunch of samples that never went into production. I think because of some issues that happened in his personal life, but I think if they hadn't happened, I don't know if we would have seen his collaborations with Nike, his collaborations with Adidas, because he would have had his own platform, Pastel, that would have taken off like a long, long time ago. There's still samples for Pastel that he made that are in like Kim's archives and North's archives that have been gifted to them, like one pieces that, show up on Twitter every now and then. So it's really interesting to see where his mind was when he was making that stuff and where his mind was when he got a
What's-
deal with Nike and Adidas and stuff.
Yeah, what are defining differences between those two eras?
I mean, like Pastel, I think is a lot. We haven't seen much of Pastel because there's not a lot of publicly available
Yeah,
samples.
there's not a lot. Yeah.
I think the few that I've seen is there's a bunch of T-shirts floating around with simple graphics on them. There's like a varsity jacket that he made, but a lot of stuff that was not considered the norm in the era that he was making
Right.
it, which is what we see with his fashion anyway, right? Like he's always been like 5-10 years ahead of people. I mean, he started when he made the Yeezus, not the Yeezus, sorry, the Yeezy boots, the desert boots, like with Adidas, people considered them to be super ugly, and now everybody's wearing like big chunky boots. So he's always been ahead of time. So like the stuff that he made with Pastel was way ahead of its time, and now we're seeing people still kind of rock the same vibe.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you, Nelisa, because I think a bunch of us are huge Kanye fans, and I just wanted to bring out that one of my favorite moments of Kanye as a whole are the Breakfast Club interviews. Just because you can kind of really tell how they were like a few years apart, right?
Yeah.
And in the first one, he's talking about he's becoming a fashion icon, and they're calling him crazy and all these things.
Yeah.
And then the one 10 years after, who is he? Right? This is one of my favorite things. How he talks about everything he's planning on doing and actually doing it,
Yeah.
and then how that carries on.
Yeah. Well, I think there's even a more recent one where they challenge him on something. He kind of freaks out, like almost like he can't handle being challenged. Whereas maybe back in the day, he would have been a little bit more eloquent or receptive to discussion around his ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right here.
The other part of like separating the art from the artist, one of the things I wanted to say is that, especially with POC, people that are rich or just got rich, like POC, like especially men, it's something that I've noticed is that
In men, sorry?
yeah, in men, like POC men that like just got like rich or like reached a certain like class or stat, those sort of things. They tend to be inundated by a lot of politics from that class of groups. People trying to like turn them into like almost like a talking, almost a talking head, right? And what I'm saying by that is that like a lot of the racist stuff that you hear Kanye saying, he's heard it from other places, right? And usually places that like from I guess let me actually go back a little bit. So for my job, I work in arts. So like I reach a lot of these guys like this, right? And people that, like talk at them like that, right? So you kind of hear like Kanye's not the only one, right? You hear a lot of like men kind of like talk about or like just people like this person men talk about like these types of racist like these caricatures or racist symbolism or things like that aren't true, but they're hearing it from other places. I think something that we gotta kind of keep in mind as well, right? Like because of his color, we kind of put him on a stake a little bit, right? And like kind of like how we say these sort of things, right? But there are people that are saying these things outside of that, and also at the same time, like even getting to those types of like class levels, they tend to break, right? There's a bit of brokenness I see in like these people that are given these stages that didn't have those stages before because they were told no, because they were going through different like door slammed in their faces, right? And once they get there, they don't really know what to do. And I think that's something that kind of created this sort of like caricature you can see now as a person. So I think it's just more thinking about like separating art from the artist. There's a bit of empathy in there as well, even though like these things is definitely fucking horrible, right? But there has to be a bit of empathy there and a bit of like understanding of like where it's coming from and how to actually address it in a way, right? So,
and understand like what exactly is it? Yeah.
so we rambled a bit for that.
No, thank you. It's awesome.
It's interesting because when I think of that topic, I think a lot about the reaction people have to Elon Musk. People have very polarizing opinions about Elon Musk. I feel like sometimes a little isolated and wondering if is it so uncommon to reject his personal opinion on controversial subjects and yet celebrate and recognize his greatness on multiple domains that are changing our world in unbelievable ways. I know that this crowd has a technical bias, but for anybody who has anything to do with any technical subject, what he's done with reusable rockets is insanity. And that's only like one of the 25,000 things that the guy's working on. And yet, you can still recognize that he holds positions that, are a little extreme in certain cases. And I feel that about Kanye as well. I can't change the way that his early music was like the soundtrack to powerful times in my life.
Mhm.
And that's a feeling, that's a deep emotion that doesn't really contend with reason and logic. I can intellectually understand why people have such strong negative feelings about Kanye because he said horrible things. That feeling doesn't really care about that. That feeling is so integral to who I am.
Mm. I think it's on.
No, I'm just gonna hold that. Hopefully, I'm just gonna. Yeah. Hopefully, it works. So I totally understand that there's this way in which you have a particular frame on all of the art or on everything that Elon Musk does for a particular artist, and it has a lot of meaning and value in the world. And then there's some action like this that it's in some sense calls into question all of that, right? Because there's this new action that doesn't fit within your frame at all, right? Like it's not something you associate with. It's not like a kind of statement that you want to take in as being yours in some way. And so there's this desire to like separate that, to say whether it was the art at one point or there was the creativity in one domain, and then there's this like separate statement that happened over here, and I think it's separate the two. Unfortunately, and I think this is like a good thing, but unfortunately, it does actually reframe all of the past, right? Because there's a way in which there's genuine adjacency. Like by definition, the thing that created that, whether it's Elon Musk creating rockets or it's Kanye West creating music, was adjacent enough to this set of ideas to then have this set of ideas possess them. Right, and so there's a way in which I think you'd actually be very cautious about it. I think about this with Nietzsche a lot. So like we've rehabilitated Nietzsche. Like lots of people read Nietzsche now. They think that he's like this really fantastic philosopher. But like it is like actually true that one, he went completely insane, and two, his ideas were taken and remixed and became like the core of Nazi ideology. Like that is just true. And like you do actually need to reframe the whole like project, knowing that. It doesn't mean that the project is invalid. It doesn't mean that we can't take things from it. It doesn't mean that we can't see things in it that are beautiful and valuable and meaningful. But it does mean that you have to like take that into account, with what's happened, and separating them out is kind of unfair to reality in some way.
Do you mean like the specific ideas that lead way to other ideas, or do you mean the environments that lead to it, or the person? Like what is it that you feel like is worthwhile to think about when you have the connection?
So I think in the context of Nietzsche, it's like specifically the ideas.
Specifically
it's
the ideas.
Very specifically, you can have some kind of causal linkage in the ideas. You need to like be thoughtful of that in the ideas. And something like Kanye, it's probably more to do with like the nature of the creativity, the nature of the art. It's something like, okay, well, it really appealed to me. It really appeals to me. The kind of like jokes that he's making around Chick-fil-A on a Christian rock album is kind of like, it's hilarious, it's interesting, it's brain breaking, it's really cool. But that same kind of provocativeness, that same kind of willingness to break taboos, that same kind of willingness to mix the sacred and the profane is actually got something to do with his willingness to make these anti-Semitic remarks. And I think you just have to be honest about that. Like
Using this illogical leap, because people have slices in their life, right? Like there's different phases in people's lives and what they learn and what they like understand, right? So the Kanye that made atheism hard is Kanye the Nazi.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that like they're the same person or in some. Well, I guess what I'm saying is it is the same person. You can say that there are different points in someone's life that they can evolve, that they can change, all of these things. But I think it is you have to actually pay attention to the fact that this happened to a single person, right, through time, and that maybe there is some way in which the particular things that are driving the creativity that are so abnormal, which doesn't make it wrong, right? Like, it doesn't make those things wrong, are in fact causally related to the things which you don't like.
It's like a leap to say like this person and this point of view, this reference point, like 2008 became like says really anti-Semitic and really messed up things in 2023 because of like this, because of how they, because of like actually they're on, right? Their personality. There could have been a great change that happened around that time, right? Or something that kind of provoked them, or something that caused them to. We don't really know their life circumstances. It's kind of hard to say that that because of like who they were is because that's how they ended up, right?
I mean, I think the description I'm providing isn't like that logically weak. I think I'm describing it as he was willing to be provocative, to say taboo things, to mix the sacred and the profane, to push at edges of social conformity. And I think that I don't think it's a logical leap. If I'm being honest, I don't think it's a logical leap at all to say that those are aspects of character that would allow one to make anti-Semitic remarks.
No, but there's also those aspects of that character as well.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying it's bad.
Yeah.
No, that's the thing. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying that those aren't like qualities that are admirable. I'm not saying that those haven't produced incredible art and all of these kinds of things. You just have to be on. Yes.
Go, Martha, go.
Okay, I'm gonna take the mic. I have something completely different. No, my 2 cents is the way I view it is I take someone whole. So who they were at 5, 15, 30, 40, throughout their whole life, I would view them. I wouldn't separate the man from the art. I like the idea of the man is the art. But I think for me, it's something that I still have to come to terms with because I'm a very judgmental person. I think everyone is to a certain extent as well. However, we're all very flawed. We don't know what we would do in different situations. We're looking at like the 1%, the 0.001% of the world in with all this power, to Kanye's point, like Elon Musk, Nietzsche, like Kanye. And the thing is, we don't know what we would do in these situations. Like when I saw the TMZ pictures of him on that boat in Nice or in Venice, my mind went straight to judgment, this and that. But that being said, I still have to, take into account all of his amazing work as an artist and understand that, like, if my life was under the microscope, I would get called out for certain things too. Maybe to the minuscule extent of like me, like little suburban whatever, compared to him. But I think my 2 cents is that you can't remove someone from their actions, from their art. You have to take them as they are, as flawed as we are in our own little bubbles as well. That's my 2 cents. So okay, you come back.
No, I like that. I like that, and I want to also extend. I'm also not like a huge Kanye. I wouldn't say not fanatic. I like Kanye, but I'm not like as well versed as most people are in this room. But since we're on the topic of like comparing him, and I totally see the comparison between like Elon and him. I don't know Nietzsche very well either, but what I do understand is that like and this is maybe going to come off a little bizarre, but like he doesn't fit the traditional human. He is not a traditional human in the sense of like what we expect our neighbor to do. I personally don't have that expectation of him. I think his behavior is erratic, extreme, but I see the same in Elon and how he deals with his employees. And I think one of the things like the main themes that I've been able to draw is that like great things don't come from like that comfort level too. Great things will come from these extreme ideas. So when we're looking at his art and like his influence in fashion, that's coming because someone's stepping outside the bounds of what we're typically normal, like what's typically normal or what we're typically expecting of our, I can't say fashion designers. I'm also not an artist. But like, that's the general trend that I see. So like when I see him saying all these extra things that, don't really, they have like a bad look to them. In my mind, it goes back to like, I can't disconnect this from his art. Like it is one full package deal. And also, like, I do think there is also like the mental health thing to address too. Like, we can't discount that completely when someone's like speaking out of terms, or in the moment there's no filter. And I have family members that have bipolar disorder, and like this is very common. Like, things are being said with no filter, no thought. They're extreme ideas, but and yes, they are sometimes problematic. But also, like, looking back at his art and thinking, what normal person could draw these parallels and these metaphors that have so much depth? And like, he's pumping out freaking albums year after year, and I just have like, this has given me such an appreciation for how quickly he churns out really meaningful and deep things that I didn't originally like know about. And it gives me a new appreciation. But again, to like my main point, like, I don't see him as like he is not a typical person. Elon is not a typical person. Like, yeah, just in that general vein.
Yeah. It's a lyric for sure. Yeah.
I just wanted to bring up this one story of Kanye said by Jamie Foxx. Have you guys heard of it? When he was doing the Gold Digger song? So it was like when Kanye was like really young and nobody knew who Kanye was. It was literally, I think, after his jaw broke. And he was just doing the song, and Jamie Foxx was having one of his parties, and he was like, "Oh, go on a song with me." And Kanye had no confidence back then, but he was still strongly opinionated. And this kind of linking to like Ahmed's talk before, where it's like, how do you create art, and how do you be like a great artist? I think it's just, again, strong opinion. So even when he didn't have any like clout in the rap business, he was strongly opinionated still, right? And he stood by his gun. So even with the song Gold Digger, he had a vision and he stuck with it, regardless of how bigger Jamie Foxx was or whatever Jay-Z told him. And I think like that's something to like give props to anybody who's trying that. And I feel like most of us as society, we kind of like, oh, you're not following the path that's supposed to be done. Like all these people who end up doing something great were the ones who just are strongly opinionated and don't, I guess, follow. And we should try like supporting them a little bit more.
Melody? Thank you.
Thanks. I think Kanye is someone who pushes boundaries, and I find it interesting how, sometimes we love him for pushing boundaries, and sometimes we vilify him for pushing boundaries. And the thing is, I think if you are someone who pushes boundaries, like, you have to constantly push. Like, how will you find, if you like try to temper yourself, you might have never pushed the boundary enough, right? Like, you won't know what the optimal place to land is unless you go over it. You know what I mean? If you go over it, then you like where to pull it back to. And so I do think like the character that he is, he's gonna do offensive stuff. Like, and I'm not saying that it's right, but I also think that like what Kanye to me is someone who pushes boundaries, and he's not always gonna get it right, and he's gonna make mistakes, and he might need to pull it back. But in order to like truly drive transformational change, like that's the risk that you take.
I'm gonna make a point about his albums. I don't know who I'm agreeing with in this room or not, but has anybody here been through like a Kanye rollout before? Like a Kanye album rollout, like that up and down cycle when he releases an album. I think everybody knows the experience of him putting out a track list and then another track list where all the songs are different. And one thing I noticed when I looked at how his albums are crafted is that I think like the last 5 albums, they've been through like several track lists. Like The Life of Pablo is a story that he made the track list like 2 hours before the album dropped, and before that it was a completely different track list. Like when you guys listen to Donda, there was like 3 listening parties. It was a different track list each time. Same with Yeezus. I think it got cut down to like 10 songs like right before it came out. But it always shocked me that like as randomly as these albums are put together, they always were able to express what Kanye was feeling or living in that moment. Like when we look at Kanye's life, I think your presentation did an incredible job of that, of just showing how perfectly he mirrored whatever was going on in his life, in his art. And back to like the track, like, those albums weren't meticulously crafted to tell a story. It's just raw self-expression. So that's something I've always thought when I thought about Kanye is, yeah, we can go into like the metaphors or the narratives that he puts in the lyrics, but like no matter what he does, he always just gets us to feel. And I think he is like the pinnacle or like the peak of self-expression when it comes to like being a human.
I have a general question. Maybe there is no answer, but in My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, why did he not feature, like, why did he not put down the names of all the like artists that were in each of the songs? Because that kind of threw me off because like there'd be Rihanna, supposedly Kendrick Lamar is also in some songs, whereas in a song. Do you know why?
I don't know why he did that for all the artists, but on all the legs, he has like 25 people on a single board.
There's so many. Yeah. I think I don't know this for sure, but in general, I think when people purposely don't put those down, it's to not distract from the actual vision or the story or whatever. Because when you go and listen to that album, you'll be like, "Oh, I want the one with Rihanna," like you know, instead of like actually listening for it.
Also, on the chorus, you don't need to credit them on the song.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you don't need to.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So like Vince Staples and like features on like Senorita.
Yeah, yeah.
On the title track.
Wow.
I think one more comment that I'd like to make is that there's lots of artists, both in music and otherwise, that are as big, if not bigger, than Kanye, but not a lot of them have the same impact as Kanye. I think the one aspect that most people like skip out on when they look at Kanye is how good of a curator he is. Not just his music, just how good he is at picking things that are good. Like the Chipmunk Soul sound, he created that years before somebody else like picked up on it, and it gained popularity. Not because Kanye did it, but because it was genuinely like a good sound. The Yeezus sound, where he mixes rock and hip hop, like didn't gain popularity because Kanye did it. It gained popularity because it was actually good, and Kanye just happened to be the one that discovered it. So I think like part of his genius is like how he can just select things that are good and express them in a way that appeals to the masses, so that it has like this mass adoption. James Terrell, the artist, light artist, I didn't know about him before Kanye at all, but like since Kanye featured his work, like one, this all the celebrities have him now, have his pieces. Two, like it's genuinely like gone on my bucket list of like, you know, artists to go see, like whose pieces I want to go see live, because it's such a beautiful piece of work. Not because Kanye did it, but because it was like, it's good. Yeah, like, it's just point blank. He just does things that are good. So it's hard for like other artists to have that same impact. Like I would say Drake is an artist just as big, but like Drake doesn't have that same kind of impact. Yeah, he has some impact, but not in the same way that Kanye does.
And
you know?
to add to that, maybe in between, is I think it's interesting to consider his confidence in his own ideas, because he's done that successfully so many times, right? So it's like now he almost like he believes in some of these ideas and he's going to say them anyways because he's just so comfortable with that process of putting whatever is in his soul. Like he has that, like that direct line to his soul, just like communicating it out. And maybe it's just gotten more complicated over the years, but he still has that same process.
So I just want to jump on that. Also, he's one of the only artists, I think in his like 40s now, right, that has like Gen Z appeal. And I think he did that really, really well with Donda. So like, I don't know if you guys remember like Donda rollout. It was like waterboard. It was like pretty bad. But it was because like he stayed in a stadium, basically tried to make like stadium rap, that's how he called it, right? And yeah, basically live streamed it. And that's the album that if you talk to any Gen Zers, they're like, oh, I love Donda, right? And it's so weird to me because I hate that album. But it's also, if you send me Donda Distilled, please. Like,
But
yeah, like it's actually it's a terrible album if you like talk to anyone from like any millennials, anyone that like, you know, was back in the old like Dusty era with like the rap era. I call it the Dusty era. I'm old, but like I call it the Dusty era. I think like you realize that like Kanye is the only one that's actually gone through those eras. Like Drake has. But as you see, like he's actually losing a lot of Gen Z appeal. He's lost a lot this year, of course, right? I'm not going to get into that, but Kanye is the only one that's actually like from that era, kind of like keeping it. And second point, which is totally unrelated, Elon Musk is a fraud. I just want to say this out loud.
What specifically? You gotta say.
He doesn't do anything innovative. He basically acquires companies. He like fires half the team. basically takes their patents, takes their like whatever proprietary technology they have, then slaps his name on it and says, "Cool, I'm gonna like this is my."
He's done that a couple times, but not in everything.
And actually, most things, if you go back even PayPal, like we could talk about this. Go back even PayPal days, right? He was a hack. He's always been a hack. He's not technologically sound. He's only a businessman who sells like bridges to like different like country, like different like states, right? Sorry, I'm sorry. He's not good. Anyways.
Yeah. If that was from your soul, we accept you.
I'm not saying you're wrong.
I'm going to show some un-Kanye like restraint, and we're just going to leave you on. Leave you on. But going back to this idea of Kanye's popularity, the thing that stands out to me is that Kanye does not filter or act in any way except for the way that he wants. His popularity, unlike Drake's, is not curated. It's not PR polished, and it's not tested on an audience. It's just Kanye off the dome, showing up with a Kardashian lookalike and a body condom and like Venice. Like he's just doing whatever Kanye does, and I think it's that reason that he has such authentic interest. If Kanye is going off the top, he's going to say something crazy. He's going to say something out of bounds, but in there is going to be an insight that no one else has had, and he's going to frame it in a way that makes it relatable, so that people from all kinds of crazy backgrounds have this shared interest in Kanye, whether it be through fashion or music or both or Twitter or whatever. And that's just him being him. And that, going back to the comment that, is it Ellie? Not you, Ellie. What you said about just being one of one, just being completely different than anybody else on this planet, either now or before, and we just happen to be in the same space as him, right? Like it's a wild thing to get to talk about.
More just a question. Okay, obviously, like most people in this room, I mean, it sounds like everyone's like pretty like well-read and well-listened Kanye fans. And if you haven't, we're all at an age, I would assume, that we've known about Kanye most of our lives. How do you guys think, like newer age, maybe even like the what is the newest generation? Not Gen Z. What are they?
My kids.
Sure. Like literally the newest generation coming in that don't have the context of us seeing that history, like that transformative history of Kanye. How do we think that they will be like, how receptive will they be to his extreme behavior? And how will they be able to like kind of like justify it in the context of like not seeing the full picture? Unless they like obviously went back and like did their due diligence, looked through whatever, and maybe had this open conversation, which I think a lot of people aren't having. But yeah, how do you?
It's like our parents' music.
Yeah, how do you think like people would, I don't know, receive that? Any new music or like behaviors?
I'll take that.
Okay.
What do your kids think of Kanye?
My kids don't think of Kanye. If my kids are 10, 7, and 3. So if they've heard Kanye, it's by accident because I have a copy sneaking into my office. The speed at which culture's moving, I don't know if Kanye will be relevant to them. I don't know if Kanye will be relevant at all. Today, my 7-year-old was taking my kids to school, and my 7-year-old was asking when she's going to get to learn how to drive my truck. And I said to her, I said, I don't know if you're going to learn how to drive at all. Because who knows, what the state of autonomy is going to be, right? Well, who knows what's going to happen? Cars are probably just going to be driving themselves. And what was really interesting in that conversation, she goes, okay, buy a car for me now and just keep it safe until then. Because she really liked the idea of being involved in driving the car, like that action. And who knows what these kids are going to want or like, but I do know that they are approaching topics that we approach from a very different angle. And they're aggressive. They don't care what people think. And already as little kids, they take controversial positions on stuff.
I think Kanye is relevant to us because we've seen him progress through his life. There's a lot of artists, to me personally, that I think probably had the same impact that Kanye did from his time onwards prior to him, like Wu-Tang probably had a big impact. I'm not a big Wu-Tang fan, never listened to them religiously, but like I'm sure they had a big impact. Dipset, I'm sure had a big impact. Like there's lots of groups before pre-Kanye's time. But sure, I mean like there's groups. Yeah, there's groups. I'm sure there's groups that had an impact, similar impact to what Kanye did, but in their time. And I think you just forget. I think one of the quotes that might have been during the Zane Lowe interview, actually, where he talks about how his goal is to become his goal is to be forgotten, right? But his art to be remembered. He talks about the guy who invented the stop sign or the toaster oven. Nobody knows who it is, but it's so ubiquitous with your life that you use these items day to day. So I feel like 20, 30 years from now,
Such good soundbite.
yeah. There's also, I think, the Lady Gaga soundbite from the same
Oh yeah,
interview.
I wanted to include it, but I was like,
Polaroid one.
yeah.
But yeah, I think what's Gaga no low cameras? But yeah, I think people will still listen to his music, but I think they'll forget this contextual piece, the conversations that we're having. His music, the anthems that he's made will still stay relevant years from now, just like we listen to music from 70s, 80s, 90s sometimes. But him as an artist, I think, and the complexities, the controversial things he said will probably they'll be forgotten. They won't stand the test of time, unless people like Ben who look into Nietzsche have that contextual context, right? Like to provide to us, that his ideologies were translated directly into Nazi philosophy. I didn't know that,
Right.
But like people who really do, people like you who deep dives into an artist's work are here to educate. Unless spaces like this exist,
Yes.
it'll be on.
Yeah. Okay, I think we'll end it there. We'll keep music on and I'll keep this going. So if you want to turn to each other and share your Pablos, go ahead. But thank you everybody for coming. Very. Thank you.
This is great.